Good morning, Last Best Conference. How y'all feeling? All right, that's a little bit better. We got some folks floating in from the back, and that's just fine. Welcome to Friday, day 2. Excited to see everybody. I hope everybody had a fun evening last night. I know I really enjoyed myself. I think that sometimes it's those informal gatherings and exchanges of ideas and reflections upon the day that deliver some of the best learning. So I hope you guys were able to have that kind of an experience as well. And maybe some of you got up this morning and participated in some of this morning's activities too. When I was thinking about sort of what stood out for me and what kind of I'm taking away, something that seemed to reoccur and a theme that I found was this notion of, being courageous, not worrying about the skills that you don't have or that aren't available to you, and leaning on your community in order to kind of support your new efforts and find places to create new knowledge for yourself. And I think that's really powerful, and it resonated for me, and it certainly speaks to the experience that I've had. But as I was thinking about it more last night, I think it's also important that we mention, while you're thinking about what are the skills I need and who in this community may be able to help me facilitate growth in that area, that we're also really thinking about what do I have available and what do I have to offer. I do a lot of trainings with young adults, and a lot of that is surrounding networking and rapport building. And what I always say is the best way to network and build rapport is to figure out how you can be of service to others. Right? So as you're here in this room today, I encourage you and challenge you to really be thinking about that. What do I have to offer? What can I deliver? Where do I shine? And how can I make that available to others? There's this thing called the law of reciprocity, and a lot of people are fairly familiar with it, right? But how it goes is that when you give to others, they naturally feel inclined to return that gesture. Right? So we're talking about what is it that you need and how do we tap into the power of this community in order to meet that need. Think about that. How can I be of service to others? And recognize that when you are in service to others, you create that reciprocity that's going to bring what you need towards you. So that's kind of my little thought for the day. And I hope that you guys had an opportunity to kind of sit with your thoughts from yesterday and come up with some of your own little light bulbs. So while we're thinking about service and the importance of that, I do want to take a moment to give a shout out to the volunteer team that is supporting this event. There are more than 30 volunteers who have generated time and energy and money to support this event. So if we can just give a quick round of applause to the volunteers. So good. Awesome folks. I had a chance to visit with a bunch of them last night. It was enjoyable. While we're on that note, I also want to give one more shout out to our founding partners, the University of Montana and Montana Federal Credit Union. It's great to have businesses and institutions like that available who are willing to support growing communities like the one we have. Also want to recognize the preferred PR firm, which is Hilltop Public Solutions, and the preferred search engine marketing firm, Logistical Point. So again, big thanks to all of the sponsors and the folks who wanted to help us out. As we move through the day, remind you, lbcon.com, all the information that you need is on there. You are still in a position, if you'd like to add an afternoon community meetup of your choosing, you can get right on that website and you can apply, put that in there. So there's still room to create some of those learning spaces that you desire if you want to. I also want to remind everybody that directly across the street at Pocket Park, we do have a community art project going. So if you weren't able to swing by there yesterday, I encourage you to. Adelaide, the artist who's working there, put some really great pictures up on Instagram. So I think that everybody should kind of swing by and at least put their fingerprint on that project. Let's see, final note, lost and found. Somebody left a set of Audi keys and some Ray-Ban sunglasses. So good for you for not recognizing that's missing. Wow. But yeah, any lost and found, I think there's 2 pairs of sunglasses back there, actually. So anybody who's looking for things that have been lost, just go ahead. That's Isaac back there. And big thanks to Isaac, the sound engineer and the light engineer. He's ruling it. And also our lost and found captain. So he is our new lost and found captain. If you find something, get it to Isaac. If you lose something, bother him with those requests. All right, so to start us off again today, we're going to do a little activity, get your energy and your mental focus in the room. So I'm going to invite Kate Shadell, who was with us yesterday. She's a yoga instructor at Sweatshop Studios, out to kind of get us moving. Welcome, Kate.
Thanks, Shannon. Hello again. So yesterday we did a very brief 1-minute meditation, which might not have been so brief for some of you and too brief for others. So a little introduction as to what we're doing today and why we're doing this and why it's so important to me. I have been in management for about 13 years now and have been practicing yoga for about 6. And grew up in competitive sports. I'm an extremely competitive person, and I always want to be the best, and I want to be number one, and I want to have show all the greatest numbers. And yoga has definitely put that in check for me a lot. And when I started yoga, it was all about the workout, and I was sweating, and I was getting strong, and then I kind of started to move into the mindfulness of it and connecting to the breath and how important it was to move and start your day or stop your day and restart your day, doing a little bit of activity, and what it can do for your team if you're at a conference or you're in a store meeting and when you're seeing that everybody's glazing over and not very focused anymore. Sometimes it's really great to do some movement and motion, and especially in a leadership role, if you want to put your ego in check, try yoga. It's like leave the ego at the door. You try to do some crazy arm balance, and you definitely can't do it. I'm not going to have you do any arm balances today, but to get us started for the day, I'd like all of you guys to stand up and find a space within here that you have at least a full arm's distance apart from anybody else so that you're not hitting anybody. And probably if you're in the middle rows of the chairs, come out from the middle rows. So you might want to go back to the bean bags, layer yourself up, because we're going to be doing some forward folding, what have you. Awesome. Okay. So just to start, we're not doing anything major. You probably won't even think of this as yoga, but strikingly, anything can really be yoga. The beautiful thing about yoga that I've really grasped onto is that there's no past or future tense of yoga. Yoga is right now. It is the present. It is where you are at the second, and it changes from day to day. What you did yesterday, you might not do tomorrow. What you do today, you might not do tomorrow either. So there's different sides to your body. Everything feels different. Left shoulder is different from the right shoulder, same with your hips, etc. So just to start, I just want you guys to take a stance and just have your right leg and just tilt it back, and you're just going to roll your ankle. It's very quiet without music. And then switch directions. Oh. Yeah, a little Joni Mitchell for the morning. And then switch legs. And change directions. You guys are doing an awesome job. All right, then coming back to stance. And now you're just gonna roll your neck in any direction that you want, just rolling it around. And change directions. And coming back to center, and now just roll your shoulders backwards. And change directions. Such an appropriate song. In the morning and I ask myself, it's like worth living, should I blast myself? I'm tired of being poor and even worse. All right, now I don't know how much I can demonstrate this one, but you're gonna swing your arms, so you're gonna stretch your arms out and go hand to shoulder. Starting to twist, let your back twist a little as you go. It's time to fight back, that's what Huey said. 2 shots in the dark, now Huey's dead. I got love for my brothers, but we can never go nowhere unless we share. This is why you needed an arm's reach. Awesome. And you can stop that. And now reach your arms high over your head. You're going to interlace your middle finger, ring finger, and pinky finger and leave your pointer finger straight. Kind of like going back to being a kid and you have a handgun. I know you shouldn't say that with yoga. It's kind of awkward, but... So reaching yourself tall, and then you're going to lean over to your left side. Get some awesome side body stretch here. Really keeping some awesome engagement in your legs, keeping your legs strong. Come back to center, and to the other side. Coming back to center. Okay, now we're gonna get really complicated. So a big thing, especially when you're leading people or if you are a very competitive person, a lot of us hold stress in our shoulder blades and up in our traps. I'm going to have to put the mic down for this because I can't show you this holding a mic because it's very awkward. Okay. It's called eagle arms. If you can't put your palms together, just do the back of your palms on each other. And now try pushing your elbows forward. Can you feel that stretch? Now pull your elbows down a little. Yeah. This is a really good one when you start to get that tension stretch or tension stress in between your shoulder blades. This is one of the few things you can actually like get into those muscles and stretch it out a little bit. Okay, you can let that go. Shake it all out. I actually really hate that pose, but it's a really nice stretch. Okay, now we're gonna get into some leg work. You can release your arms. Now, you're gonna go up onto your tippy toes. So now we're gonna start balancing. Making cactus arms. And twist. Uh-huh. Ego check, right? You can move slowly. It helps a lot with balance. Coming back to center, and you can go back down onto your heels. Now we're going to do a pose called tree pose. So for tree pose, the best way to do tree pose, bring your hands to heart center. And then you're going to weight all of your weight into your left leg. So really get a good stance because you're going to be balancing on your left leg. Your right knee's bent, and then you're going to open it to the side. This might be a ton of balance work for you, so you can stay right here. If you are like massive yogi and you want to go into it, you can bring your foot up to your calf and stay right here. Or you can go all the way up into your thigh. Do not put your foot on your knee, though. That's like the big no-no. And hold here. If you really feel like you're like, yeah, nailed it, try closing your eyes. See how that does. All right, coming back to center, you can put that foot down. Now we're to second side, so weighting into your right leg this time. And you're gonna open your left leg open and going back to wherever you were on the first side. You should have like a lot of muscle engagement in your standing leg. And think about like sucking your hip in here. I like to say sassy hip. It's like sassy hip, pull your sassy hip in. And again, maybe try closing your eyes. See how that goes. Turn on the light. Don't laugh, babe, it'll be all right. Awesome. Coming back to center, and you can put your legs down. Give it a little shake out. All right. Now we're going to do a little more movement. I'll see how I can do this with a microphone. So the best way to start the day in yoga is with a sun salutation. Some of you might have heard this. Technically, officially, which actually, if you want to be really official, face the main doors because the sun salutation should be to the east where the sun rises. But then you can't see me. So sun salutation is supposed to be how you start your day. I'm not going to make you do a full sun salutation because then we're going into down dog, and that's a whole other aspect of going into this, and we're not all dressed appropriately. So on an inhale, you're going to inhale your arms up over your head. And as you exhale, you're going to swan dive and fold over your legs. And from here, you're just going to inhale halfway, bring your hands up to your shins, and you're going to create a flat back. And then exhale, fold. And inhale, push all the way to stand again, arms up overhead. Exhale, hands to heart center. We're gonna do 2 more of those just to get us going. Inhale, arms overhead. Exhale, fold. Inhale, lift halfway. Exhale, fold. Inhale, push to stand. Exhale, hands to heart center. Beautiful, you guys. One more time. Inhale, arms overhead. Exhale, fold. Inhale, lift halfway. Exhale, fold. Inhale, push to stand, arms overhead. Exhale, hands to heart center. And that's your morning practice. So hopefully got some blood flowing for you guys. It is a really great, even those half sun salutations are a good way to get your team going. So thank you very much.
All right. Big thanks to Kate for coming out and stretching you. Before she got started, she was a little worried about the microphone. And so she's like, Shannon, would you come out and maybe like be my body to model? And I was like, well, I think we're supposed to be stretching people. I don't think it's supposed to be like a comedy routine. So dodged the bullet there. One thing I forgot to mention when we were opening up is that River City Roots did begin today. What that means for you is that parking on all the streets downtown is free. So if you've been tracking and thinking you need to get out there and move your vehicle around, just know that you don't. So that little reminder, little nugget for you, relieve yourself of that stress. So I'm really excited to introduce our first speaker this morning, Lou Setnica. Lou is formerly the Global Director of HR for Patagonia. Not that this crowd needs to know it, but that is a premier outdoor industry brand. She managed all of the company's global HR-related responsibilities, including recruitment, staffing, employee relations, benefits, employee development, training, payroll, and internal corporate communications. She began her career at Patagonia in the wholesale division and then worked for 4 years as an HR specialist in recruitment and employee relations. She also worked as an assistant to Patagonia's founder, served as the company's public affairs director for 10 years, and prior to leading the human resources team, was Patagonia's director of training and employee development. Lou now owns her own HR consulting firm, Setnica Consulting, and is a professor of human resources for the MBA program at California State University in the Channel Islands. Clients utilizing her consulting services include the Forest Group, King Arthur Flour, Momentum Incorporated, Kettle House Brewing, and numerous other coaching clients. Side note, Lou was lucky enough to get on the Smith River this year for folks who are anglers in the room, and she doubled up on a top fly and a dropper. Fishers know that that's awesome. So give it up for Lou, because that's clearly her biggest accomplishment. Here we go, Lou.
I can't believe we're starting with a fish story. But it was very exciting, I have to say. Thank you so much for including me today. It's really an honor to be here, to be joining all of you in this really momentous event that we're having over here in Missoula. I live just about 3 hours west of here in North Idaho, and we just love coming over to Missoula to fish and enjoy all of you that live here. And it's just a great community that you have here. So thank you. It's an honor to be part of your group. So what are we going to talk about this morning? First of all, I feel like I should sing the national anthem because I have a music stand and I'm a singer, and it would be so incredible if we sang the Star Spangled Banner, but we're not going to do that. So we're actually going to, we're going to talk about courage. And one of the themes of this conference is courage. And so I thought it would be really appropriate when I was invited to come and speak here. They said, what would you like to speak about? And I said, well, is one of the themes here courage? I want to talk about courage at work because you are creators, innovators. Most of you have your own businesses or you work in a business, and a lot of business places and a lot of workplaces, courage is absent. And so I feel like for me personally, my mission post-Patagonia, working within an environment, is to bring what I love, which is helping people create courageous workplaces, but also to take greater ownership and put forth this idea of personal responsibility. But how did I get here? And I know the conference organizers really wanted you to hear my story, so we'll go through that a little bit briefly, but we're also going to do some work together I'm going to give you some tools about how to create courageous workplaces. So bear with me as I go through my life story here. So I was born in New England, and I did a very courageous thing by coming out west to go to college. And I went to University of California at Berkeley, which was early 70s. Berkeley was quite a crazy place with lots of people showing great courage in doing very odd things in the streets. But for a gal from New England that had never been exposed to stuff like that, it was a real eye-opener. And I absolutely loved my experience at Berkeley. And in the summers, I wanted to stay in California. So I decided to start working up in Yosemite. And I had a summer job working in different concessions. This is from Glacier Point, so I actually worked at the gift shop up at Glacier Point in the summer, and I worked at the gift shop in the lodge, and I started to develop a real love affair with Yosemite. So when I graduated from Berkeley, I took these aptitude tests, and they told me that I should be a gym teacher. And I said, I'm not going to go and be a gym teacher. But I really didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew where I wanted to be, and I wanted to be back in Yosemite. So I was very, very fortunate. And I ended up getting a job with the National Park Service. And as most of you are aware, yesterday was the 100th birthday of the National Park Service. And I was so blessed because I started in dispatch, I did some administrative jobs, and I eventually ended up running all the campgrounds in Yosemite Valley, which also takes great courage because this was pre-reservation system, this was lines out the yin-yang, so I had a great time there though. And I ended up falling in love and marrying another ranger, and we ended up following or becoming a career. We were what's called a dual career couple. And we were so blessed to end up with some of the most, they call them the crown jewels of the national park system. The Everglades, top left, I worked at Everglades. My husband worked at Biscayne National Park. Then from the Everglades in South Florida, we went on to the Tetons, and we both worked at Grand Teton National Park. Then we transferred to Hawaii, and he worked at Hawaii Volcanoes, and I worked for the U.S. Geological Survey at the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory. If any of you have an opportunity to go to the Big Island, you must go up and see what's happening with the volcano. It's exciting. And then he transferred. We ended up having 2 young kids, and we ended up at Channel Islands National Park. And it's a very funny story. He called me he had gone over on a house hunting trip. And I was still in Hawaii with 2 little babies, and he called me, and he said, you can't believe the house prices here. I mean, this is Southern California, and we had been living in government housing in Hawaii Volcanoes. And he said, you have to go back to work. I said, oh, okay, I'll get a little job or something. He goes, no, you have to go back to work full time, and you gotta make money, because I can't qualify for a mortgage on my salary alone. And I said, but I don't want to go back to work. I have these 2 babies, and I want to be home with my kids. And he goes, too bad. If we're going to live in Southern California, you've got to go back to work. So I scratched my head, and I said, what am I going to do? Well, what happens to be in the town of Ventura, which is where Channel Islands National Park headquarters is also the headquarters of Patagonia, the clothing company. And our relationship with the founders of Patagonia goes all the way back to Yosemite days, because my husband started working there in 70, I started in 71, and at that time, the founder of Patagonia, Yvon Chouinard, who went on to have an incredible career, as a businessman, but before that, he was putting up some of the premier routes on a lot of the walls in Yosemite. And my husband tells a very funny story when he was a very new Green Ranger driving through the Yosemite Valley roads, and they pulled into the parking lot, he and this other ranger, at Camp 4, and there was Yvon. And for any of you who know the story, Yvon started Patagonia by selling climbing equipment out of the back of his car. And so they pulled in, and he had the trunk open and was doing a transaction, and my husband said, who's that guy? And the other ranger said, that's Yvon Chouinard, don't mess with him. So we went on to meet him and his wife, who both worked in Yosemite. And then a few years later, they also have a home in Jackson, Wyoming. And they used to get their mail at the Moose, Wyoming post office, which is where I got my mail. And one day I ran into Melinda Chouinard, Yvon's wife, and I had 2 little babies in tow, 1 infant, 1 2-year-old, just it's snowing, they're hanging on me, and she looks at me and she goes, wow, if your husband ever gets transferred to Channel Islands, you should come work at Patagonia. And I looked at her like, you are nuts. I am never, ever going to join the human race ever again. For those of you who have had young infants stuck at home in the winter with the snow blowing horizontally, I thought, I'm doomed. I'm never going to get back into the work world. Well, fast forward, it's the late 80s. We're in Ventura, and there's Patagonia. So I went and knocked on the door at Patagonia, and the receptionist was there. I said, I need a job. And I think it was a she then, she said, well, here's the application form, you fill it out. So I took the application form and I was sitting in the reception area, and down the stairs from the second floor comes Melinda Chenard, and she goes, Lou, what are you doing here? And I said, well, Tim got transferred, we're moving here. And she said, well, we're gonna get you a job here. And I said, oh, okay, what should I do, what should I do? And she goes, give me that application. And the next day I think I had 3 interviews, and I ended up in a job that was entirely inappropriate for me, which was accounts receivable bookkeeper for the wholesale division, where in my first week of work, I lost a $30,000 payment from a dealer. I just lost it in the system somewhere. So that was not the right job for me, but eventually I landed in the place that filled my heart with joy, especially working at Patagonia, a very unconventional, courageous workplace. And I had such a great tenure there. I was there for 25 years and had a variety of different jobs, as you've already heard about. But most significantly was head of HR, and I really, really enjoyed that. And so I learned so much about courage, because I feel like, Yvonne, is the title of the book here, Let My People Go Surfing? How many of you have read that book? Any of you? Get a copy of it. It's a really, especially for those of you who are in business or starting businesses, it's his whole philosophy about how to do business. And that Let My People Go Surfing is really a metaphor for the way I think a lot of you run your businesses anyway, which is about letting people show up and be who they are. So if the surf's up, leave your work, go surf. If it snows, go skiing, come back. The work will be there when you're able to get to it. So while I was at Patagonia, I ended up, Patagonia is a collection of human beings, and human beings sometimes struggle with having courageous conversations. So it got me to thinking when I left and I went out to be on my own and start my own business, how do I help continue this quest about courage in the workplace? So I want to know why we should be talking about courage in the first place. And for those of you who have any question about this, we spend an awful lot of time at work. And one of the statistics that I read said that adults employed full-time report working on average of 47 hours per week. That probably seems pretty low to a lot of you in here, right? I remember when I left Patagonia, I must have been working like 65 hours a week. So anyway, the point is that you're working a lot, you're at work a lot. Why not make these hours be the very best that they can be? And then on the flip side of that, what does it cost you to not be courageous at work? So lots of times people who aren't courageous at work are living in fear. And if there's one thing we know about fear, it's paralyzing. It stops you in your track. If you're fearful, you can't move forward. And how are you going to help your business be successful, or you personally to be successful, if you're paralyzed? You can't show up as your full self if you're in an environment where there's no courage present. It's probably inefficient, because if you're too afraid to speak up, the organization is not benefiting from your great ideas. So what an inefficient way to be, and what a cost to lose potentially a great idea. And then finally, it could cost you in terms of relationships and building rich relationships. So I was sort of curious about what happened to our courage. And the reason this was really prominent to me was I just spent several weeks back in Maine, where my family lives on an island on the coast of Maine. And we are very blessed to have the next generation of babies begin to bloom. So my sister and brother's kids starting to have kids. I don't know what you would call that. But basically, I'm a grand aunt, and my new grandnephew was there, and he's 9 months old, and he was in that transition from almost walking, holding on, to actually taking his steps. He was very, very close. And while I was watching him, I was thinking, wow, that takes a lot of courage to get from being held in someone's arms to actually being independent and going out on your own. So what happened to that? We all had that when we were little infants becoming mobile, upright human beings. What happened to that? And part of it is how we're raised. And I know in my case, I was raised in an incredibly controlling environment. So the idea of courageously speaking up against what my father had to say was so out of my mindset that it just went away. So that's what happens. Could happen at home. It could happen at school. A lot of schools are pretty controlling. You remember, stand in line, raise your hand. If you have to go to the restroom, raise your hand. A lot of control there. So you begin to lose courage there. And then depending on where you end up, at work or in school, it could also be an environment that does not foster courage. So from my viewpoint, why should I care about courage, or why should you care about courage in the workplace? From my viewpoint, I think courage really creates creativity. So new ideas, the freedom to express different points of view, diversity of thinking, and potentially down the road, obviously better business practices, deeper engagement, you have happier employees, and it seems like the workplace becomes lighter. But you can't just do it overnight. You need to have some fundamentals. So I want to just spend a few minutes right now talking about what I view to be sort of the fundamentals. And I really don't want anyone here to die by PowerPoint. So I apologize. I do have some PowerPoint slides, but if anyone seems to be leaning over, like, shake your neighbor, wake them up, because I don't want anyone, we don't want to have death by PowerPoint here. So what are the foundational elements? Vision. It's really, really, really important. These are really important foundational elements for you and your business to talk about. This is the optimal desired state of your business. What do you intend your business to become? So I gathered some examples of visions, a few from Habitat, Ford, and the North Face. You can read them here. There's certainly a lot of opportunity, but somewhere, somehow, you need to define, where are we going? Where are we headed? Next, your mission. Why are we doing it? Why does my business exist? What's the whole point? So we have a vision, we know where we're going, how are we going to get there? So here's a few so Patagonia is the one I'm most familiar with. Make the best quality products with the least amount of harm, and then use business to inspire and implement solutions to the environmental crisis. Very clear mission. If you were someone that was joining Patagonia, you would know that this is how they're going to get there. This is the vision. And then there's a few other there. And then finally, once we get in this great workplace, how are we going to behave? What are our values? And this is where the opportunity for courageous conversations really comes forward. Talk about our core values. Again, most familiar with Patagonia, quality, integrity, environmentalism, not bound by convention. Look at Zappos. That's a lot of values. My hunch is they could probably have consolidated those into a few, but that's a lot. So, I want to acknowledge that being courageous at work is not easy. But over the years, I've sort of developed a couple of tools that I think would be kind of helpful. And I hope that you will indulge me while I have the opportunity for you all to practice these tools while we're all here together. Does that sound like a plan? Because I want you to, it's tough sometimes going to conferences and we hear great people, but we don't have anything in our pocket when we leave to actually implement when we go back. So I'm going to just give you a couple of ideas of things that I want you to take out of your pocket and implement at work. So the first thing is about shifting complaining to courage. Oops, sorry. So, what do we know about complaining? Complaining brings us great short-term relief, but does it really change anything? So, Morgan, who organized the conference, I hope she'll indulge me, and I'm going to articulate a complaint that I bet she probably had at some point in working with me and coming to this conference, because this slide deck kept changing, even up to the last minute yesterday afternoon. So if I were Morgan, I'd be going, oh my God, another version of her slide deck? Are you kidding me? What the heck is going on? And the complaint needs to be super whiny. So, why is she keeps doing, what is the request? What I want to do is practice flipping that into a request. So if I'm Morgan and I'm complaining about Lou, I want to practice flipping that into a request. So Morgan, please indulge me, Morgan. Thank you for letting me do this. She could come back to me and say, Lou, no more second chances on the PowerPoint deck. It's due here, this time, this day, that's it. Specific, concrete, and actionable. So I want to practice a little bit, and I want you guys to put on your whiniest tone to be able to really articulate a complaint. And it may be you have a complaint with someone sitting right next to you, like perhaps you don't like the color of their shirt. So I want you to really turn to your neighbor, turn to someone. It would be really great if the person sitting next to you, you really truly had a complaint about them, and you could practice turning it into a request. So if you can think of something really whiny, perhaps you don't like the coffee this morning. The coffee here sucks. That's not true. I think it's delicious. But you could practice with that one. How would you flip that around and make it a request? Conference organizers, could we please have tastier coffee, and could it be here at 8:30 so I could have a cup before I sit down in my seat? Specific, concrete, actionable. So I want to take 5 minutes. I want you to turn to someone in the room. I want you to think of something. Perhaps it's a complaint about someone in your household, but let's just take 5 minutes and practice it. Each of you have a chance to practice with each other. So we need to have real whiny voices, and each person has a complaint, but you have to turn it into a request. Make sense? Are you all willing to do this? Okay, do it. Real whiny. I want to hear lots of whine in the room. Okay, if you haven't already done so, switch partners, switch partners. Everybody gets to be whiny. Okay, let's wrap it up and come on back. Wrap it up, come on back. Did you guys notice even the music was whiny? It was great. Thank you. Okay, couple of volunteers to give us the real whiny complaint and what the request was it. Oh, got someone in the back here. You have to stand up and make it super whiny. Who's your partner? See? It was so bad she couldn't even. Your partner wants you to. Okay. What was the complaint? Real whiny.
My complaint is I wish they put a spotlight over the coffee carafe so I don't spill my goddamn coffee.
Perfect. Nice job.
Goddamn dark.
Perfect. All right. So, great. Good job. Can you now flip it around? Okay, you can stop complaining. How would you make that specific, concrete, and actionable? Pretend you're meeting with the conference organizers.
Put a spotlight right above where the carafes are so that it's for even this good time permanent. So that when people are pouring their coffee, they can see before it fills in the beautiful.
Perfect. I even would go so far as to say, please place a light, instead of saying, I would like to see. You could be even more direct than that. Great. Thank you for that. Someone else, one more example? Anyone else? No one else? Go ahead. Again, you got to stand up and be super whiny. Turn around to everybody and be super whiny.
This is my HR director.
Yes, okay. We get lots of complaints, so we know.
Our dress code changes every day. We can't figure out what we're supposed to wear to work.
Is that whiny enough for you guys? No. Let's make it really whiny.
Our dress code changes every day.
Keep going.
We can't figure out what we're supposed to wear to work.
Okay, so what was your name? Rob. Flip it around and make it to your HR director. Because we hear a lot of complaints, so it's nice when people come in with specific, concrete, and actionable requests.
Carrie, could you please have a more consistent dress code so I know what to wear every day?
Thank you. Thanks. Okay, so what do you see happening there? Remember at the beginning of my talk, I talked about personal responsibility. Do you see Rob, rather than going to his neighbor and complaining about this dress code, he's taking personal responsibility for trying to make a change. And I want to suggest to you that sometimes making those requests takes great courage. But what a difference on the other side. You're actually taking personal responsibility, but you're also creating solutions instead of complaining. Does everyone see how if you take this, just this seemingly very simplistic concept of turning complaints into requests, it can actually begin to shift the mindset at the workplace and start to shift more in a courageous direction. Make sense? Yes? Okay. Let's talk about another tool. This is another good one. How many of you sometimes have moments in your days at work where you're feeling other than positive or neutral? Yeah? Most of us have moments during the day when you're feeling other than positive or neutral. Often, if you can have a conversation framed either this way or the second phrase, it can start to alleviate a lot of the problems. And what these phrases do is they force you to own how you're feeling, and they force you to take personal responsibility for how you choose to show up in the workplace. So, for example, I'm trying to think of a good example. So, if someone came up to me and didn't say good morning to me in the morning, that would leave me with a little queasy feeling in my stomach, if normally they had always said good morning to me. So I might be making up a lot of stuff about why that person isn't saying good morning to me. So the important conversation, which often takes great courage, would be to sit down with that person and say, you didn't say good morning to me this morning, and you have a real frown on your face. I'm perceiving that you're in a really bad mood and that you're mad at me. Is that accurate? And then it invites them to the conversation table, and you get to have some clarity around the reality of the situation. And that person might respond to me and say, I was completely unaware. I did have an experience once of having unaware. I wasn't in HR then, I was in a different part of the company, and the HR director walked right by me. And I said, hi, Susan, how's it going? And she walked right by me and didn't say a word. And I freaked out. I'm like, oh, I'm going to be fired. She couldn't say hi to me because I was going to be fired. And it was pretty early in my tenure there, and I loved working there. And I'm like, I don't want to get fired. And then I start going through this litany in my mind of what have I done to cause someone to fire me? What did I do? I didn't do anything. And I start all this babble in my head. And later I see her in the restroom. And I said, hey, Susan, earlier today, you walked right by me and didn't even say hello. Is something going on? Are you mad at me? Am I about to get fired? Is something going on? She said, I did. I didn't even see you. I didn't even see you. She was so focused on whatever she was doing that she didn't even see me. But think of all the time I wasted that day emotionally and probably distracted from my job being in that zone. So again, I want you to indulge me to practice this. And I don't know if you're here with someone that you work with and you have something that you want to talk to them about. This is a pretty safe environment to play with these tools. So again, it's sort of, and you could actually use your partner. I would suggest you talk to somebody else this time, not your complaining partner. And use the tools. Think about something that's going on, perhaps at work, perhaps at home, that you could rephrase this way. Because once you say, when you say or do whatever it is, this is how it makes me feel, is that accurate? Is that true? It helps clarify what's going on. And again, I'm suggesting to you, these are acts that take a lot of courage, but they can really shift the workplace because you're becoming more authentic and more honest and more true about what's going on at the workplace. So let's take a few minutes to practice this. Again, if you want to play with, you really, like your life is perfect and you don't have any issues with anyone, great, make something up. But for those of you who don't and you want to practice, this is the time and the place to do it. So have at it. Pick a different partner, okay? 5 minutes. Okay, let's come back together. Can you wrap up your conversations? Okay, you know I'm going to be looking for some volunteers. You don't have to use a whiny voice to give us the example. You can just be in your regular voice. But I'm curious about how this felt for you to shift. Does anyone want to volunteer? Any pair? Yes. Okay. Do you want to stand up so we can all hear you?
Sometimes when I go into my office, one of my office mates will always shut the door to his office. So I would say, hey Jim, when I come to the office and you shut your door, is it because I'm too loud on the phone and that bothers you?
Hang on. When he shuts his door, how does that make you feel?
It makes me feel like I'm too loud on the phone.
There you go. So, or that's what you're perceiving. So when you shut the door to your office, it makes me feel that perhaps I'm annoying you or I'm, use feelings. So go ahead.
And is that accurate?
Yeah, yeah. So how do you think he's going to respond? Is he here?
No.
Oh, bummer.
He'll probably just respond that it has nothing to do with me, that he just likes privacy and he's on the phone. We're in an industry where we have private information that's discussed.
Good. And you haven't done that yet, right?
I have not.
Okay. But it's bugging you.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Not going that often, but
Yeah. So use this. Try it. See what happens. My hunch is he's probably going to say, he could say that you're too loud, which is good information for you. But it also might be that I like privacy. I like having my door closed. So, but at least you have that dialogue out there and he's aware that you're aware as well. Great. Thank you very much for volunteering. Someone else? Someone else? See, it takes great courage to speak in front of a group of people talking about courage. Nobody else wants to volunteer? Go ahead. Stand on up.
All right. This is to a coworker. Sometimes when you walk by my desk or when I notice you talk in the hallways with your coworkers, you look like somebody dramatically. I just want to make sure that we're all okay.
Okay. This is how it makes me feel. How does it make you feel when you think she's mad at you?
It makes me worried that you don't like me and are not telling me.
And is it hard for you to do your best work if you feel that people are mad at you? It's hard for you to do that, correct? Right. So then you would invite her to say, is that accurate? Is that your intention? Do you intend to be mad at me all day? And invites her into the conversation. How do you think she's going to react?
I did ask her this question.
Great. Okay.
And she said, no, we're fine. I just wish you didn't ask so many questions of her staff people. But other than that, we're okay.
I wish you didn't ask so many questions in your staff. She said that of you? Okay, and that's what she was mad about? Okay, great. And then that could invite further dialogue, but it's good information for you to have. Great. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Do you see how just these simple questions can change the work environment? How you can perhaps have a more courageous work environment? Now, some of these are really tough to do. And I had a few conversations just this week about a person at a workplace where she felt she was certainly willing to do this, but she felt she wasn't going to get the results she wanted, or she wasn't going to get the information that would make her feel better. She felt that the person she was going to be taking these questions to would not respond favorably or in a way that would be appropriate for her and how she wants to be at work. So for me, that's the answer for her, that perhaps it's time to take the courageous step and leave that workplace and find a new job. So sometimes that's helpful also. So they may be seemingly simple, but, and I'm certainly not denying that these take courage to implement, but I really feel strongly that these small, simple tools lead to deeper understanding, new perceptions, and certainly closer and more trustful relationships and new ideas. And I really think it's a disservice if we keep all our great ideas in our head because we're afraid of speaking up. So this leads me to my vision, which is the true workplace. And the acronym TRUE stands for a few very key important words. And I will do what I can do the rest of my days that I'm on this planet to help workplaces become true workplaces. Ones that are truthful, people are honest, they speak in an honest way with each other, they're respectful, relationships built on integrity and respect. There's unification, everyone's unified around this way of being, and engaged. So if you can get a true workplace, it's highly likely that you're going to have a super engaged workforce, and it'll be a really fun place to work. It really is possible. I've seen it happen with some of my clients. Just implementing small little tools like that can completely shift the dialogue at a workplace. So I don't view it as an idealistic pie in the sky way to work. It's possible, it's achievable, but it takes great courage. And you all are here because you want to talk about courage, and we're committed to coming to this conference to talk about courage and creativity and passion. So I invite you to try this. Take these tools, go back to your workplace, see what happens, see if you get different results. Make sure you have the solid foundation of vision, mission, and values. If those documents are stuck in a drawer somewhere, pull them out, dust them off, revisit them, see if they're still relevant, and talk about them in your workplace. It's of no value to have those documents or those way of working stuck away in a drawer somewhere. The other thing I encourage all of you that are working is to have what I call a spirit of inquiry viewpoint in coming to work, an openness. Come to work like this instead of like this. And I know sometimes it takes a lot of courage to come to work like this because sometimes things are happening at work that bring you down. But take the time to figure out what those are. And then finally, be consistent. Try and use these tools on a regular basis. If you get discouraged or you get beaten down, don't let that bring you off this path of creating the true workplace. Stick with it. And if you need any help along the way, I am here to help you. Thank you very much.
All right, one more time for Lou. That was awesome. Woohoo! All right, so next up, we've got Rock Turner. Love the name. So if you don't know Rock, I'll tell you a little bit about him. He is a native Montanan, and he currently serves as the Director of Workforce Programs and Development at Bitterroot College. His background is across all sectors. So he has served in the Navy for many years. He's served through AmeriCorps and AmeriCorps Vista. He's also been a small business owner, and as stated, he's now working for public institutions. He has a BA in history, a master's in public administration, and he is currently a PhD candidate in international education. So he is clearly an underachiever. In his free time, Rock likes to run long distances, bike long distances, grow big beards, but he loathes fishing. So give it up for Rock.
Good morning. I do loathe fishing. I'm the only guy in Montana probably that feels that way. So I'm going to begin with a little exercise that I think will help set the stage for my discussion. And it goes like this. I'm going to give you a prompt, and I want you to say the first word that comes to mind. Say it out loud. You don't have to yell it, although if you're super pumped about it, feel free to yell it. But I just want you to say it out loud so you're verbalizing it. And we're going to do that twice. The first one is, what community do you belong to? Say it. Excellent. The second one, what inspires you?
People.
Excellent. Okay. That was good. I particularly like that so many people said Missoula. Missoula is a super cool place. I like it. It's a community that I consider myself a part of, even though I live in Hamilton. I'm going to begin by framing the rest of this conversation in my own experience, because I think that will add context to what I hope to achieve here. Like Shannon said, I'm a native Montanan. I'm actually a fourth-generation Montanan, which I think is actually quite strange here in 2016. My family, prior to living in Montana, lived in Norway. They took a boat over and then took a covered wagon out to Malta. Eventually, my family, being my immediate family, my mother and father, made it to Hamilton. That's where I grew up. I had an interesting childhood. I should say, a caveat to this is that I had a very happy childhood, loving parents. I had a great upbringing. I grew up quite poor. However, my father was in the Marine Corps, spent a year in Vietnam, came back, and basically experienced all of your standard trappings of PTSD. So he had chronic inability to hold a job, chronic inability to maintain relationships, suffered from a lot of issues, and that's a part of my upbringing that really caused a lot of issues for me. Poverty was a major part of my life, and that's because of those experiences. So I grew up in Hamilton, playing in the woods, playing by the river, doing all those things with no expectation that education could do anything for me at all. As I go through high school, my counselors, my teachers realized that I was your classic at-risk youth. But when I was 15, I told my dad, I said, I think I'm going to play college ball. And he said, I'm just going to be honest with you. For the first time in your life, you're not a good athlete. You're not good at school. And we don't have any money. Have you thought about the military? And I thought, wow, that's spot on. I'm not a good athlete. And so I shelved my dreams of playing basketball at Duke and set to the decision-making process of whether or not I joined the Marine Corps or the Navy. My dad was in the Marine Corps. Everybody else in my family was in the Navy. In addition to being a fourth-generation Montanan, I'm a fourth-generation American vet, fourth of 5 generations I'm quite proud of. So one day I'm going to the car store, and I needed a gas cap, and a guy next to me standing in uniform, and I said, hey, are you in the military? He said, yeah, I'm a Navy recruiter. I said, boy, am I about to give you a story. Would you sign me up? So he's at the CarQuest getting a gas cap, and he's trying to recruit people in the 90s, which is not the easiest thing to do because there wasn't much inspiration to do so. And here I just walked right into his lap. So they signed me up. My counselors and teachers, they all knew I was gone. They didn't have to worry about me any longer. I graduated high school. I sometimes wonder if they just allowed me to graduate knowing that I had something to go on to, because I was a pretty poor student. Just as a demonstration of how poor of a student I was, my class had 114 people. I graduated 107th. Only 109 graduated. So I was not out of the group, the 5 or so that dropped out, but I was effectively third from the bottom in my class. Pretty poor at studies. So I run off to the Navy. You could hear the air slam shut behind me. I left so fast. I was super excited to get out of this place. Western Montana was not for me. I didn't actually know What else was out there? No clue what I was going to. I mean, what business does a kid from western Montana have joining the Navy and heading to the ocean? I'd never even been to the ocean. I'd seen Lake Como and I'd seen the river. So I get to boot camp and immediately something changed in me. Immediately. I get to Chicago. I went to boot camp at the Great Lakes Training Facility just outside of Chicago. They bust me down. Everybody's really nice and cordial, and I thought, well, this is a treat. I get to boot camp, and a company commander comes up and says, here, just come along with me and line up. And there's about 150 of us or so, and we're lined up. And, is everybody okay? And they're being nice and making sure that our needs are attended to. And they said, we're going to come by with a basket, and we're going to ask you to put your stuff in it. If you brought a pocket knife or if you have keys or something, just put it in the basket. And so they walked by, and I put it in the basket, and I thought, well, this doesn't seem so bad at all. I mean, I heard all these stories about how difficult boot camp is. And they're walking down, and a guy raises his hand and says, oh, I forgot I had a key in my pocket, and all hell broke loose, right? That was when it occurred to me that I was in boot camp, we meant business. And at that point, something happened, and I immediately had a sense of purpose. I wanted to be good at the Navy. I never wanted to be good at high school. I never wanted to be a good student. I wanted to be good at sports, but not enough to really put effort into it. I was just a kind of a reasonable athlete, not passionate about basketball or football or anything like that. But something in the Navy just inspired me to be the best sailor I could possibly be. So I went to the business of being the best sailor at boot camp. So I go through boot camp, everything was fine. Went to Navy Marine Corps Intelligence Training Center in Dam Neck, Virginia. That was great. Dam Neck, Virginia, if you don't know, basically borders Virginia Beach. It's a beautiful part of the world. I learned how to conduct business in the Navy. The detailer asked me where I wanted to go, and I said, I want to go any place that floats or fights. And he said, well, you're set. We're going to send you to the USS Carl Vinson. So I go to the USS Carl Vinson station in Bremerton, and I was a shipboard imagery analyst for 4 years, after which I went to NATO, a regional headquarters in Brunsum, the Netherlands, a little ways from Brussels. I did signals intelligence. Then I got out and came back to Montana. What happened to me in the Navy was a profound transformation. I left kind of a chump. I came back with a sense of purpose. I had to get out of the Navy abruptly because of a medical issue. And so in retrospect, I realized that I went through some issues with that. But it basically gave me a frame of mind and a sense of purpose that I could use when I approach everything in my life. I have a sense of commitment to others because it matters when you're on aircraft carrier out in the middle of the ocean that you're doing what's right. You have to be, people rely on you. When I'm looking at imagery and I say, yep, there's a surface-to-air missile site right here, and I tell that to a pilot and he flies and it turns out that it's actually over here, lives are at stake. So I have a sense of purpose, a serious sense of purpose. So I get out of the Navy, not really sure what to do. It's Western Montana, so I thought, well, I should start a construction company. It makes perfect sense. So I started a construction company, this former Navy guy that's never built anything in his life. But I had skills that any business owner can use. I was organized, I was inspired because I wanted to make money. And I'll be honest, I was inspired by making money. That was the reason I started the company. I would have started any other company had it been hot at the time, but construction in the early 2000s, Western Montana was pretty good stuff. So I started this construction company, things are moving along. I'm making a fair bit of money. I've got a handful of employees, 15 or so employees. We're working in Wyoming, we're working in Montana, and every day I get up and it's just drudgery. I hated it. I hated the construction process. I hated interacting with clients. I liked that I could give work to people, to craftsmen that knew what they were doing. My cabinet makers would go in and they make these beautiful cabinets, and they would run their hands over the wood, and you could tell that it meant something to them. There was a connection. When I looked at the job site, all I saw were the headaches that I dealt with. I hated it. I liked being a business owner. I got to do what I want. That's the thing about starting your own business. What everybody says, well, you set your own schedule. I did get to do what I want as long as it was what the homeowner wanted. And so it started to dawn on me, this is not something you're going to do forever. You should go back to college. You've got some VA benefits. So I started going to college, decidedly not to get a job because I had a job. I just wanted something different. So if you don't want a job, for any of you, if you're looking for some advice, if you don't want a job, you might consider getting a bachelor's degree in history because that's not a very employable job. And so I'm in the classroom with all these history majors, and they're going to be teachers, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to keep running a business, but I really want to know about history. Turns out, I found a part of me that I'd never been exposed to, and that was this love of education, this love of reading and learning and being around other people that want to be educated. So I get my bachelor's degree, 2010, I suppose, somewhere in there. I sold my company. I couldn't stand it. I wanted rid of it. I needed to reinvent myself, and I knew it. So I sold the company. It took 2 years. I did nothing but run and ride and get a master's degree. I mean, you have a chance to take 2 years off. I suggest it. It was pretty great. I mean, I wore shorts and flip-flops all summer, went to the coffee shop and did a crossword puzzle and drank coffee, and then went out and played. It was great. Get my master's degree, and I get a phone call one day. I'm walking across the Oval at the University of Montana. I get a phone call, and it's the director of Bittert College, and he says, "Hey, we've got a job here. You might be interested in it. There's one catch. It doesn't pay anything." Oh, tell me about it. So it turns out it's AmeriCorps. So I said, well, let me look into it. That night I get home, I Google AmeriCorps. I call her up the next morning, and I said, I'm in, 100%. I want to do this. So I go to AmeriCorps, go to a pre-service orientation, and I'm surrounded by all these people much younger than me. I'm definitely the old guy in the group. It's a bunch of 22 and 23-year-olds. I'm however old I was then, 30 or something. I felt old around them, but what I also felt was this sense of community that I had only ever experienced at boot camp in the Navy. That initial interaction with a large group of people that I knew were my people. All of a sudden, I'm with my people. And I'm looking at everybody who's come from all over the country. They're coming to parts of Montana to solve these critical issues that need solved. They need people who care about them, that are inspired to solve those issues. And all these people are here with me to do that. And I thought, I'm in. I'm so in. I'm 100% in. I could not like this more. So I spend my year in AmeriCorps working at the college. At the end of the year, they offer me a job. I take the job because I need a job. And here I am. So now we're at this conference on entrepreneurship. I have the most bureaucratic sounding title in Western Montana, the Director of Workforce Programs and Development. I mean, you would expect a bureaucrat who just goes and sits in his office and pushes paper and does what bureaucrats do. I'm here to tell you that our place in our community is based on our past experiences that we've had that we may not even know are shaping our perception of the world. And how we're inspired to do our business is what will make us an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs can run in any walk of life. You can start a business, you can work in a bureaucracy, you can work in nonprofits. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that you're able to identify a community, identify what inspires you, and work through that process. So now when I asked you what community you're part of, almost everybody said Missoula. I would argue that there is some nuance to that answer. Within Missoula, what community are you a part of? I can tell you that a community I'm a part of is the veterans community. I'm a part of the AmeriCorps community. I'm part of the Montanan community. I'm a part of this community by virtue of being here. And by analyzing what part of each community I consider my own, I'm able to find inspiration in how I conduct work day to day. It is not terribly congruent for a person that works in higher education who oversees workforce programming and does donor and curricular development to come to a conference on being an entrepreneur. But I know that a community that I'm a part of is a community of doers. I consider myself a doer. I want to see my community bettered. I want to see veterans get back on their feet, and I want them not to suffer from all of the chronic issues that so many veterans suffer from. When I walk downtown in Missoula or in Hamilton, or I go to any place in rural Montana, I don't want to see people that are impoverished. I don't want to see people who are struggling in a job that they hate, that they find no inspiration in, because they think that that's the only way that they can stay here. Because I'm here to tell you it's not. All of you are living examples of why you can live in a place like Montana and do what matters to you, do something that's inspiring to you as a result of living in a community of people like yourselves. So then I ask you, what inspires you? Something that inspires me probably more than anything else is the thought of education. I love thinking about education. So, time's running short. I want to leave you with this final thought. You all are here for a reason. You're all entrepreneurs, presumably. You're all entrepreneurs. You all have these thoughts, your thinkers, your doers, your creators. They're things that you want to do in this community. I want you to think about how carrying that out and seeing those dreams through, how that will help the community. If your thought is, I'm going to start a business and make a ton of money, start a business, make a ton of money, realize that dream, and then find out how the business that you're making the money with benefits the community and how that extra money can benefit the community. If you're passionate about starting a nonprofit, start a nonprofit. Do it, run, don't walk. Make it happen. Think about your community, think about what inspires you, embrace it, and carry it with you everywhere you go. Spend your life finding that sense of community and that sense of inspiration, and make that the driving force behind everything you do. Whether you're out fishing, hunting, running, think about your community and think about your day with deliberation. Thank you for having me. Have a great conference. I'll see you guys at the breakout sessions.
Me, but we'll do it this way anyways. Yeah, thanks a lot, Rock. No, one more time for Rock Turner. Yes, change the damn world. I love that stuff. Good stuff. Thank you so much. All right, so we're moving into our final speaker of the morning. So I am pleased to welcome Chris Gibson, who is the CEO of Recursion Pharmaceuticals. So he founded Recursion Pharmaceuticals, a company focused on revolutionizing the pharmaceutical industry by making rare diseases history. That is an awesome aspiration. To do this, Recursion combines innovative biological science with advanced computational algorithms to discover new therapeutic opportunities for rare genetic diseases. Chris has a PhD in bioengineering from the University of Utah, where he developed the core technology underlying the pharmaceutical company. Chris comes from a family of entrepreneurs, is a graduate of Rice University with degrees in bioengineering and managerial studies, and recently completed Stanford Business School's intensive entrepreneurship course. In his free time, which it sounds like he has a lot of, he loves to cycle and spend time with his family. Please join me in welcoming Chris.
Hello, everybody. How are you this morning? I'm the last person to talk this morning, so I hope I keep your interest. And as a scientist, I am used to talking about science. So what I thought we would do is spend the next 45 minutes doing a deep dive into the cell and molecular biology of the diseases that we study. Just kidding, of course. I'm also bad at jokes. So I was asked to talk about courage in your entrepreneurial endeavors. So the only courage that I'll demonstrate today is talking about this topic. This is not something that, as a scientist, I'm used to talking about. So bear with me, but let's get started. Oh, and before I go, I just want to thank the organizers. This is such a great event. Our company's in Salt Lake City, and I think it's important that the communities of the Mountain West stick together in their entrepreneurial activities. All right, so what I want to do today is just tell you stories. I want to tell you the stories of 5 people, and you'll learn more about each of these people when we get to that section. So know that that's coming. But before we get there, and before we talk about the courage that each one of these people, who each represents a group that you will interact with when you're forming your endeavor, I wanted to give you some context and tell you a little bit about my personal story. So this is me in Haiti in 2007. I was in the MD PhD program, which is this awesome thing where you sign up for like 7 to 9 years of medical school and graduate school. And I was doing work in Haiti and sporting an awesome fanny pack, which I think is like bonus points, here with some of my colleagues. And I was pretty confident that I was going to finish this program and then head off and become a surgeon, and that I would probably help on the order of 10,000 people in my life as a surgeon. And I was excited about that. So during the PhD portion of my studies, and yes, there are going to be some science slides, but don't be intimidated. We're going to make these fun and easy. During the PhD portion, I studied this disease called cerebral cavernous malformation. Anyone? Anyone? Okay, that's what I thought. So this actually is more common than cystic fibrosis, but the entire industry has ignored it. You've never heard of it, but more people in this country are suffering from this disease than a disease you probably have heard of. And it turns out you get these lesions in your brain. You can see these little holes here. Those aren't supposed to be there. And nobody was working on this disease, and we decided that we'd take a stab at it. So here's what we knew about the disease when I joined this laboratory. And this is the way that scientists think. They draw these images with these pathways and proteins, which we're not going to go through. And they're like, yeah, we totally understand this. We should totally make a drug that hits this pathway, and the disease will be completely cured. So it turns out that doesn't work. A lot of times, we get drugs that are designed based on this reductionist approach to treat patients, and they don't work. But many times, those drugs are safe. And so we all know about the terrible pharmaceutical industry and all of the discussion over the past year or two about drug prices. So it turns out a lot of the prices go into drugs that fail. Like 95% of the money they spend goes into drugs that fail. And they put these drugs in their freezers, and then nothing ever happens to those drugs. So I'm going to come back to that in a few minutes, but just remember that. There are thousands of drugs that people have spent hundreds of millions of dollars working on. Tens of thousands of people have worked on these drugs, and they're just sitting in freezers, not doing anything. So here's the problem with biology. This is what biology is really like. This is actually an image of biological pathways, but it's way more complex than this reductionist approach that people take. And what we did in my program, in my dissertation, was instead of trying to do what everybody else does and understand the biology, we live in this great age of cool technology like genomics. So we actually, for thousands of genetic diseases, we know what the cause is, we know what the mutation is, we know what the phenotype is, right? You have a patient come in as a physician, you see the phenotype, you see the lesions in the brain like you saw on MRI. And so let's just treat the biology like the proverbial black box and simply give some drugs and ask if any of these make the patient go back to normal. So you can't do that in humans. That's unethical and illegal, especially if you were just going to say, hey, I'm going to give 1 million patients 1,000 different drugs and see what works. Definitely can't do that. But you can do that in human cells. So here are cells from somebody's blood vessels, and this is what normal healthy ones look like. And in the disease I worked on, they look like this, which is different. So we simply added thousands of drugs, and specifically the drugs that are sitting in pharma freezers doing nothing, that already have gone through years and years and years of work. We added them and said, hey, do any of these drugs make these cells look like these cells? And we used computers to do that. So the computers didn't add the drugs, robots did that. But the computers actually looked at the images, and we trained neural networks to try and recognize when the cells looked healthy again. It turns out computers are way better than people at doing that sort of thing. So that was pretty awesome. And we wrote a paper, and then some really famous people got excited about that paper. And we started thinking about, like, wow, this is kind of cool. Maybe we should do something with this. The idea was if you take all the drugs in the freezers of big pharma companies and you get them in your laboratory, and then you use this approach and you do it for 1,000 other diseases, that maybe we could take this terrible, billion-dollar, decade-long approach per disease, that the typical industry approach, and we could boil it down into this highly parallelized, really short, like 5-year approach that could get way more drugs for way more patients who have diseases that most companies aren't working on anyway. And that seemed like an awesome thing to do. That was the idea. So I did what anybody who wants to start a company does. I went to Silicon Valley. So I went to Stanford and did this business program during the summer and worked with this great team of folks. Met lots of great people. Went to some, have you guys heard of Singularity University? It's this Google University in Silicon Valley, and you go there and people are talking about, like, why don't we use like alien robots to build houses from spaceships, like all kinds of really, really out there stuff. But it also really challenged us to think about how we could take this approach of using robots and computers to rapidly increase the scale of drug discovery and to do it in a much, much more efficient way. And it actually was that experience in Silicon Valley where I was like, wow, this might work. I probably need to actually go back and do this. So this is a few months later. I came back, finished my PhD. basically dropped out of medical school. I'm technically still on a leave of absence, but I think they're going to rescind that right soon. Flew to California, bought a bunch of used lab equipment from companies that had just failed, which should have probably served as a warning, but ended up buying a bunch of used lab equipment, put it in the back of a U-Haul, and then my co-founder and I drove through the night back to Salt Lake City and started the company. So I'm going to leave you here. This was the beginning of our exploration and our entrepreneurial endeavor about 2.5 years ago. And what I want to suggest as sort of the basis of my discussion with you today is that it actually doesn't take any courage to go start a company. It's so obvious to you that you should be doing that it's not courageous at all. It's like, duh, I need to go do this. This is the most important thing ever. So keep that in mind. I don't think there's any courage associated with dropping out of school to go start this company, because to me at the time it seemed like the only right thing to do. I do think, however, that it requires a ton of courage for people to join you in that endeavor, for you to ask people to basically change the course of their lives, to join you to try something that you truly believe in, and maybe they believe in a little bit, and that's part of leadership, is getting them excited about it, but you're asking people to change their lives to join you on this crazy mission, and that does take a lot of courage. So I'm going to talk to you today about family, your first employers or employees, advisors that join you, partners, and the end user. And in my field, the end user is a patient. So it's a pretty profound group of people with courage. It's a little harder to make the argument if you're like a tech firm making like a poking app, that there's a lot of courage in your users. But I think it is important to keep in mind these 5 groups and the courage that each of these groups sort of has in order to join you. So I just want to tell you stories about a person from each of these groups, their story of courage in joining my company in one way, shape, or form. So the first one is my lovely wife. This is Summer, everybody. She's a physician at the university. So she actually takes care of patients with Lou Gehrig's disease, which is a pretty devastating disease. There's a genetic component. So she was sort of on board with this idea of, let's go cure a bunch of genetic diseases. But when you start a company, as many of you who have done that know, or you start any organization, it basically becomes sort of all-consuming in many ways. And so keep in mind the sorts of sacrifices that your family will make when you start an endeavor. And they love you and they support you, and so that's important that you always remember to take time every day to be mindful, to spend time with them, to try and put aside the pressures of running your business or trying to grow your business or your organization. And just remember that the sacrifice that they're making takes true courage. So she was very excited to work on her career. She also does genetics. And in Utah, as some of you know, there's these really big patient pedigrees. This is actually a family tree, basically. And you can see it goes, it's really wide. So this is a huge family. And in genetics, that's really, really important. That helps you study what genes are important for disease. So she's identified a new gene associated with ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. And she should be writing that paper all day, every day, trying to get that work published. But instead, she and I have to split our time for our endeavors. And you all are familiar with these sorts of sacrifices. But never forget the courage of the family that joins you when you say you want to go do this crazy thing that has like a 99.9% chance of not working in many cases. So the second is your first employee or your employees for the rest of your entire career. Never forget about the folks who are joining you, believe in you, and basically trusting you to give them an awesome place to work, to listen to them. We heard some great discussion this morning about creating an environment where people feel safe, where they can be courageous. And I want to tell you the story of Ron Alpha. So Ron was born in Southern California. His parents were refugees from Lebanon. And he grew up in LA, went to a community college in LA, and did really, really well, and ended up going to UCSD, where he graduated magna cum laude. He then went on to Stanford University and joined their MD PhD program. He took a year off to go to London to get a Master of Arts in the History of Medicine from University College London. Came back and was mostly through his MD PhD program at Stanford when he won the Osler Medal, which is this really big medal for people who write about ethics in medicine. And then he and I met when I did that Stanford summer program. And Ron was on the fast track to a residency, which is where doctors go and spend some more time training after medical school at Harvard. He had a pretty sort of amazing trajectory. And as he was getting ready to go to Harvard, he and I talked again, and he came up with this idea that maybe I could have more of an impact by joining this company that's trying to do something really extraordinary, but it's also really risky. And he actually called Harvard up and said, actually, I'm not going to come to join you. I'm going to join this little company in Salt Lake City, and we're going to try and cure all the rare diseases, which I'm sure did not go over well with them. But I just want you to remember, when people come to work for you or when you work with people, think of the sacrifices they're making and the courage that it takes for them to join you in that endeavor. And this is just something I couldn't not include. Ron, when he was trying to make his decision about where to go, he made a Google form and sent it to all his friends, which this is the typical scientist, right? Like, I got to collect data to make my decision. So I just had to include this because I thought it was so awesome. He was super biased because he sent one to me, and I, of course, filled it out. And I think he ended up winning, basically joining us, ended up winning out by like 1 vote or something like that. And so he's like, all right, easy. The data points to me going to do that. Love Ron. All right. So this is Ann Carpenter. Ann is this amazing rising star. She was in Chicago. She ended up going to Harvard and MIT. She runs a laboratory there with 10 or 12 people. The NIH just took one of the grants she wrote and put it on their website as the example of a perfect grant, which is pretty awesome. And she built software that actually I used when I was first making this sort of technology-enabled drug discovery system. And she's this massive rising star, right? Like, everybody wants to talk to Ann. Everybody wants to work with Ann because she's so awesome. So right as I was talking to Ann about joining us, this really famous guy in our industry, Derek Lowe, wrote this article that wasn't very friendly. It's a nice title, Ambition from Recursion. It then goes on to say that we're super crazy and naive and all these other things. And this actually got circulated around. The person who sent this to me was Ann, as we were negotiating a contract for her to join us as an advisor. She's like, hey, I thought you might be curious to read this article about you guys. And it says you're crazy. So Ann joined us anyway because she believed in what we were doing. And that's actually pretty courageous for someone like that who has this amazing rocketing career to attach their name and themselves to something that other people in the industry and in science sort of viewed as maybe pretty out there. And actually, just as sort of a like fighting back with data, yesterday a paper that we wrote together, here's me and Ann, came out in Nature Protocols, and I'm kind of thinking of like emailing this over to Derek and just saying, hey Derek, check this out. Anyway, so never forget when you ask people to join you, and there was some discussion earlier about engaging your community. Engaging your community and saying, what can I give to you so that you get reciprocity back and people help you. But never sort of underestimate how willing people are to do that, but also how important it is that you sort of value their willingness to attach themselves, their experience, and their name to guide you. Because in some cases like this, we could negatively affect Ann's career in a pretty major way. But she joined us anyway, which is cool. All right, this is Olaf Ritzrailer. He works with Sanofi Genzyme, one of the evil corporations that makes drugs for patients with diseases. And I met him in Europe at a conference, and he and I were having some beers and talking about science, and he told me about how he spent 30 years of his life building 7 molecules to try and treat patients with 7 specific diseases, 30 years on 7 projects. That's a lot of work. All 7 of those drugs got to patients, got into the clinic, and were tested, and all 7 of those drugs ended up failing or were cut for some business reason and are sitting in a freezer at Sanofi. So imagine that. You spent 30 years of your career working on 7 things, and all of them basically ended right at that last stage before they actually helped somebody. And it turns out there are a lot of people like Olaf in the industry, people who spend their entire life working on a project or a couple of projects, and none of that ever actually makes it to a patient because so many of these drugs fail because biology is complex. And he got this idea that, wow, what Recursion is doing is awesome. Maybe one of my drugs could actually help somebody so that I wouldn't feel like I wasted my entire career working on these 7 drugs that failed. So I want to talk about the courage that he showed because he went back to Sanofi, which is this massive, like 40,000 person organization, and he said, hey, I think we should give this little company in Salt Lake City that was founded by some young guys. And unlike tech, where being a young college dropout is cool, in biotech, you're supposed to be like mid-50s, mid-60s to start a company, and you're supposed to have worked in the industry for 30 years. And he said, I think we should give them $4 billion worth of compounds, which is their entire library of shelved assets is what they're called. And we should let them try to find new ways to use these drugs. And we spent 16 months negotiating a deal with Sanofi Genzyme, which we announced this spring, and it took an incredible amount of courage. Olaf basically has staked his career he's getting paid a lot now. He's doing innovation scouting, and he basically has staked his career on this little company in Salt Lake City that claims to have figured out a better way to do something that hundreds of thousands of people haven't been able to do better for a long time. And that takes an incredible amount of courage. Here's our little announcement when we announced the deal with them. He actually ended up arguing with the CEO of Genzyme because we wanted to announce this deal, and Genzyme said no, and so he got on the phone and argued with him on our behalf. Never underestimate those first few partners, right? What it takes from a courage standpoint for them to actually join you. In many ways, they are staking some of their career, depending on how early they are in your life cycle, to join you. And it's easy to just think of them as a partner, but think of them as somebody who's courageous. All right, the last one is the hardest one. So this is an announcement we made 7 or 8 months into the company, where we got some money from this foundation to work on a disease called Rett syndrome. So Rett syndrome is pretty bad, a lot like some of the other 5,000 or 7,000 genetic diseases that we're working on. And we were excited because this was our first funding. It was $25,000 from a patient organization who believed we might have a better way. So the afternoon after this came out, I got an email. And these were the only words in the email. Our daughter is 38 months old. We hope you are successful. And attached to it was this picture. And this is Marin, 38 months old. And if you know anything about Rett syndrome, you know that she is likely to be in a wheelchair, probably by the time she's 7 to 10. She'll be in the wheelchair and get worse and worse and worse until she's in her 20s to 30s, and then she'll probably die. And there's nothing we can do. And this disease affects about 20,000 girls only, 20,000 little girls in the US right now. So there's 20,000 families who are dealing with the pain of watching their normal, by the way, the kids are totally normal until they're like 3 to 7. So they get better, and then they get worse. And not many companies are working on this disease either. And for us, it's really easy to imagine the courage of our user, right? Because our user are patients, and I don't have to even describe how it's incredibly courageous for patients like this to live their life every day despite the fact that they're basically dying. And so now, this is a slide from one of our decks that we use when we're talking to partners. Now Marin is in every one of our decks, and it's just a good way for the company to keep in mind who the end user is and keep in mind the courage that they face every day. And I'm in touch with Marin's parents, and every 6 months or so, I just send an email and ask how she's doing. We've since gotten a ton of these emails, and it's like the hardest part of the job by far, is having parents who have kids who are dying, who email you like every few days and ask, like, why haven't you solved this yet? And unfortunately, we haven't found anything for Marin's disease. The good news is, so I left you in a U-Haul truck as I was driving lab equipment back across the country to talk to you about these 5 really important groups of people who you should always value and imagine the courage that they have in joining you. To give you a sense of where we've come since that time, we now have 23 people at the company. Actually, later this afternoon, we're closing our Series A funding round, so that's exciting. We'll have money to keep doing what we do. And we've partnered with 3 of the 10 biggest pharma companies in the world who have trusted us to give us their shelved assets to try and find new treatments for about 5,000 specific genetic diseases that we're currently working on in our laboratory, using robots and computers and awesome, really smart people. So things are going really well. And I think, just to close, I just want to remind you again, sort of these 3 lessons that in my very limited time doing business and trying to build something have been really, really crucial for me. And the first one is to take care of the people who join you. And I mean that broadly among these 5 sets that we just talked about, and even more broadly. There's plenty of people that have been amazingly courageous in joining this crazy idea that is our company. And it's very important that you take care of them. We raised our funding round a year before we had to, for example, even though we're going to be more diluted as founders and as employees, because we thought it was the responsible thing to do, as opposed to trying to eke every little penny of value out of the deal by waiting till the last moment. And I think it's important that you always remember the risk that people took to join you. The second thing is just to remember there will be hard times always, and just remember why you do what you do. So whenever someone like Derek Lowe writes an article about us and it gets emailed to me and it's really mean and it hurts your feelings, you go look at Marin, you remember that it's really important to do what you do, and you just push through. And lastly, don't listen to the naysayers, but do learn from them. There will be people who tell you what you're doing is stupid. There will be people who tell you what you're doing is never going to work. And it's easy to discount those people and just ignore them. But it's also sometimes quite useful to actually understand why they think what they think. There are some reactionist people in the world who don't know why they think what they think. They just think that you're stupid, and ignore those people. But for the rest of them, listen to them. So over the past 4 months, I pitched like 50 venture capitalists, flying all over the country, exhausting, and got lots and lots of no's. And actually listening to those no's and why they didn't want to invest in our company was the key to figuring out how I could tell our story in a way that was more exciting to people. So those are my 3 quick tidbits from a very, very short time doing this and making tons of mistakes. And with that, I just want to say thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Inspiring stuff. I think we've gone all over the garden and all over the map this morning, but really positive, inspiring stuff. So we're going to start moving into our community meetup portion of the day. So again, draw your attention to albicon.com. That's where you're going to find information about what's cooking this afternoon. A couple highlights within there. We do have the pitch competition, so if you're interested in going and checking that out, please do.